Arknights. This is likely going to be my most comprehensive discussion about Arknights because admittedly any previous attempt to discuss the game has primarily been done off the top of my head, and as a result it hasn't been nearly as concise or clean as I would prefer. So, let's talk. At length, I've attempted to get into Arknights. I've read the backstories of characters that I have, the ones that I find attractive or neat. I've played through events, I even watched the anime. My thoughts and opinions remain the same. I enjoy integrated strategies and the music, but ultimately that is where my enjoyment falls flat. Anything beyond that doesn't interest me. So first, let's talk about the game itself. The characters themselves have appealing designs. Golden Glow, Mizuki, Blue Poison stand out as wonderfully designed units, and I have no issues with their designs inherently. Once you first get them, and when they're promoted to E2, the art still looks just as wonderful as it did before, and ultimately this is something that I wholeheartedly enjoy because it rewards you for building up a unit. Beyond that, I've read the stories for those units, Mizuki, Lapland, Suzerain, Golden Glow, and found myself uncaring. The stories are there, it's written, but ultimately there's been nothing done that enables me to legitimately attach myself or care for any of those units, beyond the surface level appreciation for the design that I already have. The stories are not badly written, and that's not the problem in of itself. The problem is the medium that the game chooses to have you engage with the units. It does nothing to foster a legitimate connection between you and some of these characters. Numerous times I've spoken about the combat, the gameplay of Arknights, and in the bluntest of terms, it's dull. And what enjoyment I do find in the game's systems is ultimately hampered by the repetitive nature of it. Building a unit involves farming for them, which ultimately leads to you repeating a stage over and over again until the necessary resources are acquired. However, as many have heard me say before, watching a replay of something that I've already done does not constitute as fun. When, if my participation itself is not required to begin with, I should be allowed to either sweep the stage just by spending the sanity, or leave the application running in the background while I do something else. And I understand you can have an instance of blue stacks running in the background, but I'm not talking about that. That is essentially a workaround for something that already should be in the game. This is not referencing Annihilation. I understand that Annihilation tickets have been implemented into the game, however the way they are implemented, in my opinion, is unnecessarily idiotic, to a point to where it defeats the purpose of their existence almost entirely. However, while we are on the topic, Annihilation, it's been one of my most disliked features within the game since I first experienced it. However, it is an important topic, and the rewards given when completing it are worthwhile to mention, so we'll discuss it here as a whole. It is, for lack of a better term, a horde or wave-based stage, 400 enemies that you must fend off in order to gain valuable gacha currency every week. This by itself isn't a bad thing. Genshin Impact has the Abyss, Blue Archive has Total Assault, so there are variations of this in other games. And if you do manage to clear it the entirety of the stage the very first time, it can be rather rewarding, and for every week after that it can help you build up a nice amount of pulls for later on should you need them. However, prior to Annihilation tickets being implemented, even if you completed the stage, you were required to run through the stage multiple times in order to obtain the maximum amount of rewards possible. This meant having to run the stage upwards of 5 minutes multiple times just to get the rewards each week. This is regardless of your progression, because if you managed to clear the stage perfectly, you would have to clear the stage less times than somebody who failed midway through. Either way, the time required was unnecessarily high, especially when after doing it once, auto-deploy would do it for you, meaning that you were ultimately just spectating. Annihilation tickets alleviated this to some degree, but did little to quell the issue itself, being that you could gather only one ticket per day. It was a reward for having done multiple other daily tasks already, and you still needed to have cleared Annihilation that one time. This, in tandem with farming, made the gameplay or feeling of progression grind to a halt for me and for those who I spoke to. Considering we mentioned it, progression itself, it's linear, which I like. While I don't mind RNG systems or non-linear progression itself, there is a very simple and easy path to understand in terms of getting your units stronger. And it makes this less frustrating overall. Simple, linear progression with the only barrier being resources and chips, which you do need to have completed certain stages to get. With that being said, let's talk about the community. This will be referencing the player base, not the content creators, because they are separate to a degree and all of them are relatively nice in general, so there's not much to say on them. But the general player base arguably has a bad reputation depending on who you ask. However, as most have summarized them, they are essentially a hive mind and elitist. This pendulum can swing either way and can result in either wonderful interactions with the community or completely abhorrent ones. And this dividing perception on the general games community can lead to difficulties when discussing the game itself and its player base. For new players just getting into the game, the experience itself is difficult. The systems and branches of different operators are poorly explained to you, but the community of people have a pretty wide variety of knowledge about each concept and each mechanic in the game, to a point where they should be able to better explain the mechanics to you than the game does, should you choose to interact with them. Events, however, for the most part are inaccessible, not because you can't play them, but because the difficulty is usually much higher than you will likely be prepared for. But there are guides available for those who need them, aiding new players in getting a better grasp on the game's mechanics and getting access to some of the units that are given. Ultimately, I think whilst it's difficult to get into the game in the event that you are a new player and solely relying on the game to teach you the mechanics, in the event that you choose to step outside of that and ask the community for help, you will have a much easier time. But those are my written thoughts on Arknights. Everything beyond this point will be off the top of my head because I did want to evaluate it fairly in that instance. But the stuff I mentioned beyond here, I won't pose as general statements or observations made because a lot of it can be interpreted differently based on your opinion. An example being the gacha system in the game. If you get lucky, you will have a much more positive perception of the gacha in the game than other individuals who perhaps gotten extremely unlucky. A benefit of Arknights' gacha system is that once you get one copy of a unit, that is all. You don't get anything extra for getting multiple copies of them. This does inherently mean that it's arguably cheaper to get than, say, getting a C6 character in Genshin Impact. Contrary to that though, it's not nearly as accessible as something like Blue Archive, in that once you get that one copy of a unit, you can repeatedly summon for any other unit in the future, and the LFs that you do get, the pull rarities that you do get, you can refine to further increase a unit specialization. In the event that you are someone who does like to really max out the potential of one character who you absolutely adore, say it's Ling for instance, there is not much gain for doing that. Max potential Ling doesn't inherently do anything differently than the same base Ling you get the first time you pull her. And there is an inherent difference between something like a limited banner versus something like a Silver Ash banner. And depending on how you're playing and how far you're in, it may be a good idea to re-roll or start an account during a limited banner for the sole purpose of getting them and then saving up later on. And to the repetitiveness I mentioned previously, the footage you're seeing in the background is likely just random footage I've recorded ages ago, because if I were to go in there now and record new footage, there wouldn't be much different. Overall, I still will not be coming back. I did not find myself enjoying it, and I just wanted to get this out there because I didn't want to go in with another rant about it, because I did kind of want to finalize my thoughts down below. I think there should be, at the very least, the first half of this video's script in the description if you want to just read through that firsthand. And I do want to clarify, I don't think it's an absolutely awful gacha game. I think that it's a perfectly fine middle of the pack gacha game. It is definitely not the best I've played, but perception can differ based on what you prefer. If you like the tower defense style of the game, you may absolutely love this. I just know that I don't, but I do know that I wanted to make my opinions and thoughts on each aspect of this game very clear and concise in the event that people were very or vaguely confused at least. Either way, that's my thoughts on Arknights in 2023. I may come back to it later on and do a full comprehensive review. Maybe I'll start a brand new account and really see just how far I can get into the game and finalize my thoughts there. Perhaps at some point in the future my opinions will change, but as of right now, it's a solid 6 out of 10. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like this in the future, consider leaving a like down below, subscribing, maybe head over to the Discord server, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.